Ay, my children, come, my children, come. Gather around my fire. It is time once again for story time. Come and let me weave you three tales of how Rome was created, and you shall decide which you believe to be reality. All right, so let's find out about Rome. Um, so as I mentioned, I'm gonna tell you three tales. Um, the first being of two twin brothers, Romulus and Remus. And down here you can see a famous statue of the she-wolf, the Capitoline she-wolf. It's in the Capitoline Museum. Uh, it's a bronze statue that represents the story of Romulus and Remus. They were twin brothers that were born and uh, abandoned. Um, uh, they were part gods, and the backstory goes even further. But this daughter of this chieftain uh, was supposed to, be the mother, and the father was supposed to be Mars, the god of war. In Greek mythology, would be Ares. And the father was so upset that she had these children without being married, and he couldn't fathom that the father was uh, Mars. And so they took these children and they abandoned them near the Tiber River. And a wolf came along and raised the children along with a shepherd. And these children grew up to be these very strong warriors. And these they began building a city in 753 BC. And each had an idea of how they were going to build the city, and they were both very strong and fierce warriors. Romulus had the idea of building a wall around his city to protect it from invaders. And so his brother Remus thought this was a silly idea, and they fought back and forth over it. And one day, and there were men, that followed each, and there was a lot of back and forth. And one day, Remus hops over Romulus's wall and begins to make fun of him because of the wall. And Romulus just freaks out. He just has a bout of insanity, and he kills his brother Remus. And he goes on, and Remus's men eventually follow him, and he winds up becoming the first king and ruler of Rome. This city that they built was named after him, Romulus. A lot of people will point to Romulus is to where Rome gets its name, and uh, from the twins Romulus and Remus. Now that's story one. Let me now weave for you our second story. Our second story comes from the Roman poet Virgil. And he wrote an epic poem, kind of like when we talked about the epic poems by Homer. Uh, you see Homer breaking through there at the bottom. The Iliad and the Odyssey, and we talked about the Trojan War. Well, the Aeneid is an epic poem that tells the story of Aeneas. He was a Trojan hero, and after the Trojan War, they fled from Troy, and they couldn't go back to Troy, Aeneas and his soldiers, and so they sailed and they had all these lots of adventures throughout their times, kind of like Odysseus had a lot of adventures on his way home. Aeneas and his soldiers had a lot of adventures after the war uh, throughout the Mediterranean Sea, and they came to land at the mouth of the Tiber River. As we learned in the geography of Rome, Rome was founded about 15 miles on up the Tiber River from the coast. And so um, Aeneas and his men set up camp there around the Tiber River and began uh, to create lives for themselves there. And there was a group of people who already lived in this area, known because this was the plain of Latium. They were known as the Latins. Okay, and they already existed in this place. And at first, they fought Aeneas's men, fought with the Latins, and had some war. But eventually, they became to unite the two bands, and so Aeneas and his men married into the Latins, and they had families, and so they attribute and they started this city which becomes Rome, and so they attribute this great hero Aeneas as being the father of Rome. That's story one, Romulus and Remus. Story two, Aeneas. And story three is not as exciting. Um, some people suggest that the Latins lived in this area around the Tiber River, that it was chosen and put there because of its place. It was easy to cross the Tiber River at that point. Um, Around 1000 BC, they started living there, and they started banding together, and families became tribes, tribes became a civilization, and they called their city that they had formed Rome around 800 to 700 BC. So, which story's true? Well, that's kind of up to you. What do you think? So, in the comments, leave me an answer. Do you think it was the first story of Romulus and Remus? You think it was the second story from the poet Virgil that tells us of the wondrous tales of the hero of Troy, Aeneas? Or was it something just much more simpler that a group of people banded together that lived in the area and formed the city of Rome? I know what I think, but leave me a comment. Tell me what you have in mind of the origins. Until next time, deuces!